her style, and it'll mean a lot. Get myself situated. She's a florist, and it's Mother's Day.
Oh yeah, I know. This is
And there's always like a few palms thrown in and murals thrown in, so we stay very busy all the time.
where is it? So,
It's right up here in the theater center.
oh, okay.
It's called that Crystal Garden.
She's someone who does for the community also.
Yes,
Oh.
she goes to your church.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
know that.
Yeah, I told her I was coming to this class with the pastor.
She goes to this church?
No, we use that as a.
She's been at community golf, her fellow center.
But she faithfully does that every Sunday. Thanks for all.
Yeah.
I don't want to look
This is
at
what
it.
I said week 4.
Okay. Oh, got it. That's
I
my
saw
fault.
somewhere else week 4.
I'm going to blame that. It's week 3. And this is jumping.
She's too fast, you know.
Why? I can't.
You figured it out, Jolie?
I did. I'm
Oh, good.
rocking it out at this point, so that's cool. I brought my own projector.
Oh my, you're all taken.
Good thing she is.
I was gonna say, I couldn't
Not
do the
being
phone.
It definitely helps to have your own, for when things don't go right. So okay, it'll be all right.
May I just say,
Yes.
at the event I went to on Sunday, which Seraphim's put on,
Okay.
they had the assistant DA, and she spoke on domestic violence,
Very good.
and I forgot the name, but anyway, I thought you would have been.
Well, I should figure out how to meet her and meet
You
those
should.
people. I got to figure out how to go whenever.
Oh,
they come.
Price's house. Oh, there.
Very good.
And then they've had 4 different ladies that have gone through the program and gotten transitional housing and
Mhm.
everything. Speak.
Yeah.
And give, testimony for what has been happening in their lives.
I should talk with them about coming and presenting on male victims. Do you know
You
there's
should.
more male victims than female victims?
She actually made a point to include
Yes,
that.
I
Very
believe,
good.
I believe that.
It's about 52% male victims if you count boys and men.
I don't think
Compared to
Seraphim
girls and-
handles the men.
Yeah.
I think they just handle women and children,
Yeah.
know. But as a DA,
Yeah.
I've seen that.
she does.
And a friend of mine, he was real big and buff, and he, little Filipino wife. Oh man, she used to tear him up. So he called the cops.
Mm-hmm.
They were just looking at each other and kind of laughing.
Yeah.
But I mean,
But what can he do? If he retaliates, he's in jail,
Yeah,
you know?
that's exactly it.
It's awful.
It's
But
difficult,
she was something else.
But it's about 95%, 96% male perpetrators.
Yeah.
So it is the offenders, the people that are actually abusing other people. So men are usually the attackers, but it could be men attacking men or men attacking boys. The victims are still men.
Wow.
All right, are you ready? I'm all excited now. This will be fun. I think. I'll try to go slow. Okay. So tonight we're going to be looking at the roots of psychology. And one of the main reasons I'm looking at this, actually we should pray. Just a good idea. It's been an interesting weekend. So let's pray. Dear Lord, I just thank you so much. I thank you for Alex. Just his heart is so in line with what I care about. And I know it's from you that we met each other. And I just thank you so much for his humility and sincerity to help people. And I just pray that you will equip him with what he needs for what you may be doing to impact the community around him right now. I just thank you for that. Thank you for Davina and my mom. I just thank you that both of them are here devoted to learning more and understanding this. And I know how much of an impact they already make in those peoples around them, and I pray that this will increase that effectiveness. Pray for those who may watch this later, that you will help things click and connect, that they can see how powerful it is to learn and use information that's in your creation to turn around and help those that you love. I thank you for everything in your name. Amen. All right. So, roots of psychology. One of the main reasons that I wanted to look at this topic is because it's extreme for Christians to fear psychology, and just this comment for psychologists to hate Christians. But more interesting is technology. It's bugging me if I have to go over here and do this every time. So. I have a problem with it.
New batteries?
Maybe. Do you have AAA around?
I can look.
I'll check and see if this is. Oh, don't even see it. One of the things I'll ask, just to keep us talking while we're waiting, I give examples of, what the common view is, but
How many do you need?
2. What AAA? What types of things comes to mind when you think about kind of this battle of Christians against psychology or psychology against Christians? Or any examples that you experienced?
I wrote this.
Oh, good. He did his homework.
Yeah. No,
I put it pretty good. I couldn't.
So I have one question, and the other thing is that I think these the reasons that more humanistic view try to bring it really away from the evolution old view that the damage that has done without people is bad.
Yeah.
And so that's something that seems to be science is superior than other things. And those who are religious community are weak and innocent people. That's the way, unfortunately, we think that they think, yeah. And so we have a, hey, if you feel that kind of an attitude, maybe, that.
How, and I would take my children to the San Diego Zoo, and all the way to the zoo. I'm like, well, that's not really cool. They're not really that boring. They don't make they don't make problems, okay? And so the whole way through, I'm happy to critique everything they're teaching, and science has not proven it. We know it's a theory, and yet they propagate it to community as truth. And Christians cannot do it. They should.
Yep.
On the other side of it, I've seen Christian people, okay, psychologists, I'm talking about insane actually. They use the Bible for their benefit. Women are supposed to be subservient. It says it in 1 Peter 16 that. So then you got the screwed up woman, you go to the psychologist, and no, my husband said,
Very good.
he beat me because, and so I can see where they're kind of iffy too.
Yeah, that's true. So there's a balance for both things.
Huh?
Yes.
But there's one question actually I will not use the address or you understand. What is the difference between psychology and psychiatry? Or psychology
Oh,
and
sure.
psychiatry?
So
I
very
think that
good
also
question.
included.
I will include it. Thank you. So it's actually very common that people get the two confused because they sound exactly the same. So psychologists receive their doctorate of psychology And so everything that they're learning is revolving around psychology. A psychiatrist actually goes to medical school. And so they do learn about psychology, but it's predominantly medical. Yes.
More mental side.
No, I'm just kind of, I was just kind of thinking that I was gonna get some coffee. Who can administer medicine?
Only psychiatrists or medical doctors could
So
also.
that
as
is
well.
more towards the mental illness side.
It is towards the medicine side. So psychologists tend to work with mentally ill, severe. So you have a marriage and family therapist. You can have a lot of master's level type counselors in different states call it different names. California calls it marriage and family therapist. A licensed clinical social worker can work in therapy with people. Licensed professional clinical counselor can work in therapy with people, and other states have what's called mental health counselor. So they work in therapy with people, and so it could be an individual, it could be a family, but typically not severe. They might, especially nowadays, work with severe cases, but usually it's a psychologist. So a psychologist would work with people with severe depression or schizophrenia or bipolar, some severe type mental disorders. But they're going to work in therapy, not with medication. A psychiatrist could conduct therapy with them, but typically do not. They only meet with them briefly to give them a prescription for medication. So a psychiatrist is not taught the same type of skills for therapy, some of the same ones, but it's focused mostly on the medical side, a disease model. You have a disease, you're broken, let's fix you through chemicals being altered. So a lot of times a person will have both. They'll have a psychologist or another type of therapist that they're receiving therapy from, and then they refer to the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist gives them medication, sends them back to the psychologist. The psychologist will also know a lot of times a lot about medication and may even tell the psychiatrist what they need. They don't have the same training, but they'll be exposed to it more often because they're working with patients a lot with medication. So they'll become familiar with the medications. They do learn about the medications in school as well, but they get a lot of exposure with different types of disorders, different types of medication, where sometimes they're the ones telling the psychiatrist they need at least a general idea, like a mood stabilizer or an antidepressant. That will be common. And a psychiatrist will typically want their feedback on that. Very good. So, and a social worker that's licensed could also conduct therapy, but they don't do it as much. They tend to be in more case management. And a marriage and family therapist is a broad term, even though it sounds like they would just work with marriage and families, they can work with any type of disorders as well. But it depends on what type of experience they have or training they have, but their license allows them to. And the reason why I think this is nice to bring up is because there's a lot of regulation. So if somebody is counseling and they're not affiliated with a church, where it would be considered pastoral counseling or lay counseling using their religion, then they might get in trouble because they need to go to school, they need to be under supervision. As long as they are conducting the counseling with under the umbrella of their religion, right now they're fine. That can be difficult though, because if somebody commits suicide, the profession is waiting and watching to regulate the religion side as well. They don't want people to be doing lay counseling because they feel like they're not being trained and it's dangerous, which could be true. And so they're waiting for an opportunity to have litigation. That's how it would end, is somebody would do something they're not supposed to, it goes to court, and then the court rules. There now has to be regulation on pastors. There now has to be regulation on lay counselors. So when I teach, I bring all this up for anybody in these trainings to be very careful, because you don't want to be the one that does something and then it gets into a lawsuit and something bad comes from it. So far, anything that has gone to court, pastors have won to keep their right to do counseling with their congregation and lay counselors with the congregation. Okay, so we see two very good reasons, and we'll have more along the way, understanding that the psychology field, if they were coming and looking at Christians from a perspective that they don't believe in God, they don't believe any core beliefs in the Christian faith, they might be exposed to examples of the Bible being used to harm people. That they're saying stay in abusive relationships no matter what. And I think all of us have those examples of pastors, explaining to congregation to stay in an abusive relationship. We even have an example of a pastor telling a wife to stay with her children with a husband who had molested their family member. So, those are extreme examples, but they happen. And so if you had a secular community hearing these examples, even if those examples could be found in any religion, they have pinpointed Christianity to have a lot against. And I think the biggest reason is Christianity says we have the answer. Christ is the only way to salvation. And as soon as you say that, everybody else is angry with you. How can you say there's only one way to God? What about my religion? And so it separates, and we see this in multiple areas, not just psychology, that every faith is allowed except for Christianity. And I think it's because the line's drawn and they know it, and so they don't like how that feels and they're going to attack against you. Okay, so we know why psychologists hate Christians probably, but also within the fields, as we look through history, that at the core, if you think of secular psychology and Christian faith, they are at odds. They're exactly opposite in many, many ways. The only thing is, when you get to the end result of tools that have been brought to people, there's a lot of effective tools. And so if as Christians, we don't take all this into consideration, we could miss all of those tools for no good reason other than history that has played out throughout time. So I think it's very helpful, though, to understand the history of psychology, because it makes sense why psychology views people the way it does, why there's, maybe 7 to 15 umbrella type theories that hundreds of theories fit under that are very different, and they actually don't agree. There's a lot of theories in psychology that are opposite of each other as well, not just Christianity. So 2 psychologists could absolutely disagree with each other in every way. That's common. There's nothing in the field that has tied psychology and psychologists together at all. It's very divisive, very separated. And so the reason is what we're going to look at through history. And so what's interesting is there's a lot of truth already found in Scripture that if they had that, there would be something core to stand on and to bring everybody together. But of course, they don't believe in it. So we're going to see that play out in history. So the first one, just because we're going to go in a linear format to some extent, but there's so many events that tie in, it doesn't always end up linear. So we'll backtrack a little bit every once in a while. So with Descartes, when he was existing, the common belief was that mental health problems were physical. So there was one belief that it was in the blood, and they would actually bleed people, hoping that the disease would leave the blood. Interesting, that was science at the time, and yet in Scripture it says the life of a person is in the blood, and of course we find out later that Scripture was correct, and a person would die, and it would be common that they would bleed to death and die. Another one was opposite side was the Christian faith, and Catholic faith at the time thought mental illness was demon possession, and so sometimes they would actually drill a hole in the skull to allow the demons to leave. So even though it was spiritual, it was very physical as well. That there's something physically wrong with the person you have to fix. They're broken, they need to be fixed. So around this time, it was common belief that there was a huge separation between physical and non-physical. They didn't interact at all. So people would believe they had a soul and a spirit and a physical body, and they were very separate. And there's times within history that you'd have monks, they might beat their body, their physical body, because it was disgusting, it was awful. They had this negative view of the body because they thought the spirit and the soul is what really counts. And so that's what they needed. They needed to spend time meditating and improving their mind, and that was very separate from their body. So throughout history, there's times where it's recognized that the body is something very separated from you as a spiritual person. And when Rene Descartes came, he saw a connection with the brain and the body in a different way. And even if he didn't care what he thought of this topic, he started a topic that people were talking about that wasn't there before. And that's why he's important in the history of psychology. So before, you had a lot of medical doctors, everything was in biology, and they could see that maybe our brain, our physical brain, could impact a lot of areas in how our body functions, and possibly even impact our mind, what was considered our mind, but never had somebody at that time, well, there's always times through history, you know, where people believe this. He got the credit for it, so I'm not saying it wasn't thought of before him, but he was famous for thinking, what if the mind could actually alter our physical body, could alter our physical brain? And so that discussion, what it also created was, is there a metaphysical part of the brain, or is it only physical? Is there a soul and spirit? Is there a part of us that's not represented in our physical body? And we will look, you know, at the kind of the spirit of the air, or the belief system common was that if you couldn't see it, feel it, touch it, it wasn't real. That only what was physical was real. So at that time, right before that time, or kind of going into that time, he's saying maybe the metaphysical part, our mind, our thoughts, could impact our body. So again, you don't actually have to remember too much about it, other than he was having a discussion that was way beyond his time. Nobody else believed in the connection of the mind and body at that time. Jump 200 years and the discussion is valid. Everybody wants to talk about it now. He was having this discussion way before people were thinking about how our thoughts could impact our behaviors, or could impact the rest of our body. And an example of that, cancer patients, if they believe that there's hope, they actually have a better chance of surviving the cancer. If they don't believe there's hope, they have the likelihood that cancer will get to them, and actually they will die from cancer. So in some strange way that nobody actually can figure out, their belief system impacts them physically, and actually impacts the cancer and whether it spreads or not. So it's something we can see now, measured through neuroscience, but he was thinking about this concept in the 1600s. So he's a very fascinating guy that did start something in psychology that wouldn't have been there naturally. It didn't fit his surroundings. Okay? So the next kind of huge category is the time frame that most people believed was mechanism. And it's called a zeitgeist, as far as if you think of, you know, what everybody just believes that's surrounding you. Everybody knows this is true. It's what they live their life off of, but it's not always tangible. It's just how they see the world. So at the time frame in the 1700s, especially, you know, Western Europe and surrounding that area, Germany and Switzerland, a lot of those countries, their spirit in the air, or their zeitgeist, how they viewed the world, was that the world was like a great machine. And it was the time when you had the clock invented, and then you had, after that, machines. And something that always helps me remember the concept of this time frame, at some point there was a defecating duck. Okay, so it was a duck that was a machine. He could wind up and he'd walk around pooping, but he looked real. And it was one of the most amazing inventions of the time, and people would travel from everywhere to see the defecating duck. So it's an example of how people saw the world. They were so excited with this new technology, these new inventions, and it was fascinating. And they thought at the time, there's nothing greater, that they've reached the peak of the technology available. They thought, clocks, how amazing. So this will all make sense. We've got to go into what these are like, because it's how they viewed the world and how they viewed God and the universe. So you think of a clock as intricate, tiny parts, gears, all put together in just the right way, and then you wind it up and it exists, and it exists on its own, and it works, and it's complicated and amazing. And then machines will be the same way. You'd have machines that could do what men couldn't do. You'd have pulley systems, and you'd have, you know, a variety of machines created that would take what humans could do much farther. They were complicated. There's a lot of tiny pieces all put together working just right, and you might need a human to be involved in keeping it running, but pretty much once it was made to work how it's supposed to work, it would keep working. It would run. It would do the job it needed to do. So the perception of people and the universe was colored around that idea. So humans must be complicated machines. We must be able to separate humans into parts, like we would a clock, and analyze them, and look at them, and figure out what all these parts are. And then we can put them back together, and then we can understand what a human is. And the universe must be an amazing clock, an amazing machine, the greatest one ever created, that there was some divine creator out there that created the universe, wound it up, and let it go. Backed away from his creation and let the universe play out as it was created to. So, one benefit, at least people believed in God, but they believed God as very distant, away from his creation, because he wound it up to work and let it go. Okay? Because this is so much information, I have no idea if you have a context you read, so you have a context. Give me some feedback about what you're thinking about this time frame so far.
Are we idiots? I'm sorry. First of all, doesn't the Bible talk about all that stuff? That's why I'm kind of not understanding. Wasn't there Christians around that time?
There were Christians, but there were a lot that were not Christians. And we tend to not rely on the Bible. Think of even the countries where, first of all, we're talking about Germany. We're talking about countries that wouldn't actually be Christian. But then we're also talking about, even within the Christian countries, people are not reading their Bible.
Bibles are not that available.
Yes, yes. Yeah. So depending on which country, you might have the Pope. You might have other people telling you what the Bible says. You're not reading it for yourself yet. Okay? And so there are always Christians throughout time. You will see that. There'll always be Christians trying to spread truth throughout time. But in this time frame, the predominant view was that we were machines, great, wonderful, complex machines. And what's interesting, and the theme I want you to remember, is that people were using what they saw to decide what the world was, instead of using the Bible. And it was the greatest rage. It was seen as the top of the science at that time. All the scientists, you know, everyone who was genius was buying into this idea. And of course it sounds absurd, but the time, that was the top of technology. Imagine if they could jump into our century and see what technology is there. And how would they have interpreted humans at that point? I have no idea. But the point is, when humans try to figure out any answers to the universe or to people or any of that, they base it off the best effort of amazing brains, and they fall short.
Yeah, the reason is that now for us it is easy to look back and analyze the stupidity, but they cannot see this.
Yes.
That's the thing. So
Mhm.
that is a limitation.
Yep. Very good. So, if you had a clock and you saw all the pieces, even if it was broke, you find the pieces and you fix it, and then you wind it up and it goes. So, with that concept, determinism was believed by most everyone. And what determinism would be, let me make sure I'm not going, yeah. Determinism is things are going to happen the way they're going to happen no matter what. You can't intervene. And actually, fatalism would be another view of that. Is that from the Indian culture?
Yes,
Yeah.
fatalism is Indian culture.
Yes. So things are going to happen if you can't stop them from happening. They're going to happen how they're going to happen. Well, determinism was very much like that. That it would be, you know, you're not going to have a different outcome. With no hope within this kind of view of people. A lot of times, if somebody had a mental illness or something like that, it would be seen as sin if they were a Christian or believed in that concept, or, you know, well, that's just what life brought to you. There's no hope that something would be different, because however it was created in the very beginning and set to run, obviously this was supposed to be the outcome. So this is your life's how it's supposed to be, because it was started in the beginning, wound up to work a certain way, and there you have it. That's what you get. So there's not hope, there's not optimism at all in this environment.
I don't know, it's an overstatement to say that, you know, because the Calvinism
Yes.
takes the extreme view of it.
Yep.
That goes
Absolutely.
To the right? So
Yes.
that's a very influence upon humanity, right?
Oh yes, and it was hard to pick what to include.
Yeah.
But do you remember? I think it was 18 something with Calvin. Do you remember the
Yeah.
year?
Yeah, 18 something.
Yes. So it actually fits really well, because this lasted.
Yeah.
It lasts later into other psychologists after Darwin. Freud was deterministic. You know, definitely early 1900s, it was still there. So absolutely, Calvin, you know, who came with predestination to say that only the elect will go to heaven, and there's nothing you can do to not be saved if you're supposed to be saved. That deterministic feel was even found in that theology. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. So empiricism was another huge idea that came along out of the medical side especially, and out of science of the day. And basically empiricism is you measure what you can see, touch, feel with your senses. If you can't touch it, it's not real. If you can't measure it, it's not real. If you can't see it, smell it, feel it with your senses, it doesn't exist. So thoughts, what we might consider thoughts, obviously there's a physical aspect of thoughts now that we understand the brain, but any metaphysical side, the soul, the spirit, and what we might see as metaphysical aspects of dreams or thoughts, that's not real. We don't care about it. We're not studying it. We're not measuring it. We're not talking about it. Only what we see, feel, touch is real. So when they started studying people and they started studying anything, they want to see it, they want to watch it, they want to observe it. They're looking at behaviors. Nothing not tangible with our senses is real. So another wonderful example of how now we can see how ridiculous that is. Because through science, we learn that our senses are tricked all the time. Magicians and illusionists know this well. We can be tricked. Our vision is not very good. It can be tricked, and is all the time. So we put so much weight, the scientists put so much weight in our senses. And later we'll look at, even to the point where intelligence was measured based off the quality of your senses. If you can hear better, see better, smell better, feel, measure the touch of an object quicker than others, you were seen as more intelligent. So outcomes came from this in the beginning when psychology was a very new profession based off this idea that now we would see as ridiculous. But at the time, and I would say today even though scientists know that there are flaws in our senses, we use the scientific method, is what it's called, to study things. We want to measure it, we want to watch it, we want to see it, we want to track it and quantify it. This is what we see as science. So that's still existing today. So this was kind of the feel of the entire thought process of people at that time. Any questions on empiricism? So you can imagine, well, I don't want to go too far. Let's wait. Okay. experimental psychology. To me, this is fascinating how it all ties in. I hope you see the relevance of it all unfold. So Germany was different from other countries at the time. And Germany, I'm not going to try to pretend to have dates exact. So just say before the deterioration of the country and then eventually Hitler, they were doing well. A lot of money went towards education. They were giving a lot of money to the universities. And this is what's fun about Germany. When other countries were denying biology and psychology as sciences, they would not allow them to study animals or biology or anything like that because they were not seen as real sciences and they were seen as evil as well. Germany was fine with it. And Germany told professors, you can study anything you want to. And they told professors, you can have human subjects, use your college students. So Germany was able to do a lot more research and different research. And we know, if you connect it with other time frames in Germany's history, some, experiments we would never be allowed to do today. Germany did.
They did a lot there.
Well, they did the Holocaust too, though. Yeah. And we'll see why some of this actually impacted why that happened. So, but the important thing is that you had laboratories all over Germany with everybody on the brink, cutting edge research in biology, physiology, and so the medical type side of studies, and psychology would come out of that and out of those same scientists in the United States later. Okay, so Germany said everything's a go, do whatever you want to study. We want to be the best. We want to get ahead of all the other countries in science fast. Okay, you have the human observer being really important, because if you're supposed to measure what you see, feel, touch, then you have a person involved studying this. You as the observer are tracking how many times does this behavior happen. Whatever you're tracking to study, you're watching it with your senses. Okay? Problem is, anytime you involve a human in science like that, there's errors. So there was a problem because the method that they were using to study, there would always be errors because there was a human involved. It didn't actually work well. And they had a very difficult time in experiments trying to control for human error. So I just think that's a funny aspect in it all, how important they thought the senses were, and then how the senses failed them in their human observation. Laboratories, and then the problem I'm talking about, that human observer is not actually a valid way a lot of times. We have to do it, but we know that there's going to be error. And then we come to Darwin. So Darwin, his Origin of the Species in 1858, he presented a concept to the scientific community that was very well received. They loved it. There were other people that had similar ideas before Darwin, but how he was able to write it and to communicate it, it went over really well. Obviously, there were Christian communities and other types of religions that were not excited about it, but predominantly it was very well received. And what it offered people was a life without God. Now you had a way for creation to be existing without a creator. And humans are now considered animals, just higher evolved. So we can see, we'll see it later, how much came from this. Because now people could view easily life without God. Before, remember, they didn't have it right. They thought that God created a clock, wound it up and left, but at least there was a concept that there was a God. Now there was no need for a God. We have an answer for life without God. And then, well, Christians, I think that actually, no, I just researched it, but not to see if I have my history of church.
That's not that long ago.
The Protestant movement started in the 1500s in Germany.
Well,
so
there.
Christians were there predominantly, but of course now the parameters
Yes.
I guess that's true.
Yeah.
And I do, I don't remember 1858, but, oh, maybe it wasn't. I had one of the maps out, they have the timeline, and there were revivals, Great Awakening, early 1900s. So with the Great Awakening, it wasn't like all of the United States, but it had these pockets of revivals in different states. Charles Finney, and you just look throughout time, and there were these different revivals throughout. So I couldn't figure out how to write that well within this because it was so sporadic, and it was nothing tied together well. Only to say that the Great Awakening was a long stretch of time with different areas represented within the United States having a revival.
I mean,
It was not
Christ,
simultaneously.
like Christ, Alexander Christ, there was still, I guess, huh?
Well, in this, it wasn't. It was a while before Christians had a revival with their faith.
Yeah, the 1524, if I remember right, the 1524 is the Protestant conversion starts, right? So then 1500, 1600, 1700, all these places church was growing, coming from the dark ages actually. The church was there, and but when the science comes, people are attracted to that more. Even today, the same thing that happens.
Sure. Even with Tim LaHaye, he spoke to our class because he's affiliated with the seminary, and he was talking about his experience in counseling at the time when some of the forefathers were starting psychology, and how the Christians experienced that. And he said basically, pastors everywhere, all of a sudden when you had doctors talking about psychology, they thought, this is fantastic. It's the new science. It's amazing. Let's go learn. So the pastors were learning under Adler, which is the guy right after Freud. They were going to study and learn from them as if they had wonderful truths to share. They were excited, and it was, they were caught up in the new fad. And they also had this impression that if they have a doctorate, they must know some great information. This is wonderful. And then once they got there and they started learning from them and being hit with how opposite it was from Scripture and how contradictory, it was a huge revolt. This is from Satan. And the pastors fled away from that, not all, but there was a huge pushback to say psychology is evil. All that is coming from psychology is against Scripture. Let's get out of here. And so to me, that was interesting to see his view of how they were excited and wanted to study, and then realized what the foundation was and backed away. And then, of course, nobody's going to talk them into learning about psychology again, when they were burned like that. So reasons for the animosity, and also that they were excited at first. And I could imagine during this time, people were intrigued to see, what is this? And is science going to disprove the Bible? That's what everybody, that's what it's always trying to happen. And it never has, ever. But you still question, okay, is this the day science is going to prove the Bible wrong? So I say quotes because, evolution can't be considered science if you're defining science as something you can see and measure and repeat. It's not the same. So that gives us a little bit, but I will say, think along the lines of the great world. Wait, I have it in my mind, and I think it's going to leave me. You guys will know better than me, so you can walk me through it. But Great Depression with World War I, is it before Great Depression? I mean, the Great Depression or after? 1914. Before.
Yeah.
Okay. Depression.
Stock market crash in 1929.
Yeah. Roaring 20s.
Yeah.
The Great Depression, then World War II. So think about that too. It is not till later that the United States cares about evolution. I'll tell you that. Or psychology. It's after World War II that the United States gets hit with evolution, and it's not through Darwin, it's through Herbert Spencer, and he brings social Darwinism, and he says the survival of the fittest. He says, you know, if you're strong, you're going to make it. He brings that side of Darwin, and the United States loved it.
It would
It
be
fit.
interesting how that coincides with German mentality of the time as well.
It's exactly the reason why Hitler did what he did. So we're just animals. Now we have life.God. Okay, we're going to jump to Hitler. So if what Darwin presented was accurate, it is a logical conclusion to kill the weak of society. It is a logical conclusion. Because if you wanted to advance the human race to the next step of evolution, if you killed off the weak and only the strong existed, they would share their strong qualities biologically to the next generation, and you would be able to take a leap in evolution. It is logical. It's just obviously goes against everything if you care about human value. But if people are not humans, if they are animals, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know in a secular community how much time is spent on thinking of this concept, but I don't know, I don't think anybody can know if Hitler truly wanted evolution to take a leap in the human race, or if he liked power and control and used it as a strategy to gain, you know, tried to gain the world. He was doing really well. He made progress. So I don't know if we'll know his motives, but how he presented it, it makes perfect sense.
But the idea has a responsibility.
Absolutely. Yes.
It has a philosophy.
Yes.
So, it's fascinating to understand this actually from that angle. Why he did what he did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wasn't he Jewish himself or something like that?
He was from Jewish.
I don't think he was Jewish. Yeah.
Really.
But he wasn't blonde hair and blue eyes.
Blue eyes. I mean, he sure looked Jewish, you know.
He wanted to. I think this is what this makes more interesting and useful to us actually, because the people should know that the idea has consequences. So this is simply about whom you marry or why you try to get married someone else in your general things oriented, because
Yes.
it's all the ideas you believe, the consequences you behave in such a way.
Yes.
You know, so this is a good example to the actually.
Yeah.
Where
Absolutely.
Darwin took, to the next leap, but Darwin may not visualize this actually.
Yes. Yes.
That is a sad part of it.
Sure. And I teach at secular universities, and when I share this concept, it blows people's minds. They've never connected what Hitler did with evolution. And they don't connect that it's still happening today.
Mm-hmm.
That if you take evolutionary thought, it fits also with communism very well. And the idea to decrease the human population through abortion, through gay relationships, those are two very good strategies to decrease human population. There's a lot of strategies built into our system that people are not aware of that fit really well with eliminating the lower of society. And this is fun because who decides, who decided white gets to be the top of the evolutionary chain? There's no rhyme or reason for that other than social, cultural reasons. So, but there's still, effort today that would look similar to Hitler's concept if we stop for just a moment and saw. And so that's scary. Sometimes too scary. People don't want to, look at it. But I don't mind compartmentalizing when I have topics like that. I look at it. I want to know it's existing, and I might have to set it aside to live my life. But I don't want to not know it. So World War II and what Hitler did was an application of evolution. It was also the start of social psychology. So it's funny, it's a paradox. People love evolution today. They see it as science. They see it as that there's no controversy. Of course, you believe in evolution or you're an idiot. It's something that is common that people never question. at the same time, when they saw the application of it in full force, they were shocked. Everything again inside people was disturbed. And that's the start of social psychology. After World War II, scientists wanted to give answers to people questioning, how could people do this? How could Hitler control soldiers to murder so many people without questioning the authority? How could that happen? How did we let this happen? We now maybe are even desensitized to the whole event, but imagine not knowing what's going on, being in the United States, and then all of a sudden one day having pictures presented through media that shows what happened there, and how many people were murdered because of their ethnicity, or because, you know, there other people besides Jews were murdered, you know, for reasons that we would never give credence to. And yet it's the application of evolution, and we love evolution, but when we see it, we don't like it. So social psychology started, but what's interesting, let me make sure I don't go too far. Yeah. Remember, Germany is full of the scientists. They're studying anything they want to. Before before the deterioration of Germany, they had a lot of money to study everything they wanted to. When things weren't looking good, before wars, Germany, a lot of the scientists left. But after World War II, they were taken and they were dispersed. Countries wanted them at that point because they were far advanced in their science compared to other countries, because they were allowed to be. So Russia wanted scientists and did get some. The United States got a lot of German scientists. And even before this, there was Johns Hopkins University started in the United States that was started by a German scientist. And it was started to look and be experienced the same way a German laboratory would be. So we took a lot of what German was doing. Later, we had our own experiments that were against any kind of ethics codes we have today. But we caught up with the experiments eventually, you know, to put regulations and what we're allowed to do. But there were times we experimented on humans, that we experimented on drugs, we experimented on military and African Americans. That all was real. There was a time when people would say, well, that's just made up, it didn't really happen. But all of it has been declassified for us to see it really did happen. And our agencies that were involved, our government agencies, apologized and promised never to do it again. But there were times they would say, for good motives, that they wanted to know how to interrogate. They were worried about other wars. They wanted to know the strategies to use to interrogate people, and so they would use LSD, they would use different drugs, you know, to get this to work. We have a case that happened later with interrogation of Michael Crow. Was a kid that was charged with a murder he didn't do, and then you watch the video of the cops interrogating him. They were using strategies from social psychology to get the kid to admit guilt. He had never he never killed anyone. It was his sister. He didn't do any of it.
Escondido kid?
Yes, he was a local person. Yeah, I don't remember where, but I knew it was local to us. Yeah. And he confessed, and thank goodness, because I believe this happened a lot more often than we've ever seen. But they had the video footage, and that's what did it, where they were able to see the video footage of the cops interrogating the kid. And there are strategies that you can use to get somebody to change their beliefs and even change their memories. And psychologists have done this. We've had a time frame in our history where we used hypnotism and actually gave people false memories. And then there's laws and regulations now to prevent that. But when you look through our history, we've done some terrible things. And then it's brought in regulation. So even if I get irritated at regulation, I know why it's there, because somebody has abused it, you know, and then they created a regulation for it. So we had German scientists continue studies in the United States, and we had them go to work on how did people control other people? How did Hitler control people? And they found strategies. And so those strategies can be used for good or for evil. You can have somebody change their beliefs and their attitudes. You can persuade them. You can influence people. Hitler was very good at it. And I think there are people today very good at it. If you know how it's done, you can identify it. You don't have to be persuaded. The easiest example is a car salesman. If you know their strategies, you can go in and still come out with a good deal. If you don't know their strategies, you will be duped. You know, there's very good salesmen. They're using what we found from social psychology. So social psychology started experiments everywhere. It was huge with experiments happening to figure out why people do what they do, basically. And there's far-reaching consequences still today. I will have examples in just a little bit.
And it's amazing. In a world that applies evolution to everything, why do we even have a judicial system?
Yes.
Because, to be honest, I mean, who says you can't kill? Who says
Exactly.
you can't cheat, steal, lie? I mean, if you're not basing that on scripture, which we believe they used when they built the foundation of our society, our religion was externalized and became our law.
Mm-hmm.
But if they remove all of that, it seems like our entire government, the laws, everything is just a big bunch of mush. I mean,
It
it
is
doesn't
true.
mean anything. And yet we stand our ground with anything.
It's very true, and I have never met anybody that had anything to say against that. If you were in apologetics and you're defending the faith, and you talk about, you know, how do you decide what's right or wrong, they have no answer. If you say there's something inside you, who would that there randomly by chance over millions of years you have something inside you that tells you what's right or wrong? And if that's there for you, great, but what if mine's different? Who are you to tell me that your conscience is better than mine? So there is no basis for deciding what's right or wrong. And that's what's interesting in this. It's a very much a paradox, because at the same time, you'll watch psychology divide into two different sections. And one is very much treating people like animals. And one is humanistic, saying that humans have rights and are amazing, and yet they view that in the absence of God, no God. So humans are the best. And so who gave them value? You know, they're animals and they'll do what they do, or they're the most amazing and the top being existing with unlimited potential, but both are so void. They're just so empty. But it's interesting how both came out of a view of no God. It's like, how did you get so much wonderful value out of humans without God? It's interesting. It's a paradox. I don't think it fits together, and I don't think people realize that. So we're going to talk about that right now. After World War II, you had psychology and far-reaching consequences for that. And we're going to see the psychology develop now. You have social psychology where people are experimenting, but you're also going to have behaviorism, Freud, and humanism. There's others in between there, but these are the huge, broad concepts that came from psychology. And you will see that it goes against Christianity, absolutely. So, behaviorism, we're going to study animals to understand humans, because now we believe that humans are animals. So we'll study monkeys, we'll study dogs, we'll study, you know, rats. Rats were most common, because that's how we're going to find out about humans. We don't want to now, you know, jump on Germany's bandwagon and experiment on people. So let's experiment on animals. We're asking the question always through all of this, why do people do what they do? And behaviorists would say because of the environment. And it's very deterministic. For example, if you had a rat in a maze and you wanted him to get to the end of the maze and learn the maze, you could give him a little nugget like a cookie, you know, something yummy that rat wants, and you could train that rat to get to the end. He will learn it. And if you give him more treats, he'll learn it faster. And if you zap him with electricity, he'll avoid a certain area. So you can look at this maze and look at this rat, and you can figure out, okay, if I reward people, they're going to do something for me. If I punish them, they're going to avoid doing something. And you can see, okay, well, now I figured out all of humanity. This is what psychology does, secular psychology. They take a pattern they see and they expand it as giving information on all life. So what behaviorism says is that all of our behaviors, who we are as humans, are because something from the environment, either something natural, and that's classical conditioning is a little abstract, so I'm not even going to talk about it much, but I'll just give the classical example of Pavlov's dog, which is on accident, he realized that he could train a dog to do something because of a natural process in the body. The dog will come, and as soon as he saw a big juicy steak, his glands would start salivating. He wants to eat the steak. It's yummy, it's there. It happens naturally. Nobody taught the dog to do that. It's an instinct. The dogs just start salivating with a steak. I think I will probably start to, you have a lemon before it touches your mouth, you're like, oh, lemon. So that's a natural thing. Well, they were studying something completely different, but in the process, a bell would ring every time this juicy steak's in front of the dog. And so eventually they rang the bell, there was no steak anywhere, and the dog salivates. So on accident, something that happened naturally with the dog was paired with some random thing, and it gave the same response. So you could pair things, something natural with something you want this person to experience. You could pair them and teach them to do stuff. And so, if you think, the only example I can ever think of this, because it's less commonly seen naturally, it happens all the time, but it's just, to me, a little bit abstract. But sexual fetishes. Why would somebody be sexually attracted to some object? It's just strange. Well, it wasn't just the object. At some point, it was paired with something sexual. Something that naturally solicits a sexual response was paired with something that has nothing to do with that. And eventually, this person has a sexual response to an object that has nothing to do with that. So that's an example. This does happen. The most common, though, that's something that's called classical conditioning, because you're just learning something on accident with being connected in your environment. Operant conditioning is more purposeful, and that would be seen a lot of times. Parents can do this with kids. Okay? If you are nice to your sister, you'll get a treat after dinner. If you, if you hit your sister, you're going to have to do more force tomorrow. We have all these ways that we are giving something that somebody likes, or maybe if tomorrow you do what I ask and you obey all day, you don't have to clean your room. So we take away something that they don't like. All these strategies, giving, taking away, punishing, to get them to do behaviors that we want. Okay, that's what's considered operant conditioning. And that's under behaviorism. And we found a lot of this stuff out by studying animals, rats, monkeys, dogs. We trained them, we gave them a cookie, they did this. And as adults, we do experience this also. Would you go to work if you were not getting your paycheck? Probably not. Maybe some people do experience intrinsic value, and they might still go to work even if they weren't getting paid. But usually we need the external reward. We need that paycheck coming in regularly. When on a consistent basis your paycheck was saved, you wouldn't trust it anymore. Maybe your paycheck, they skipped your paycheck one time out of the year. Well, you might still go to work because most of the time you get your paycheck. So depending on how they're giving you this reward will impact your behavior, whether you wake up and go to work. Maybe your job, you start slacking. Like, why am I going to do a good job at my work if they're not going to pay me sometimes? So it affects your behavior. So these concepts in behaviorism are actually valid. You can watch this, you can measure it. The problem is it doesn't explain everything. What about when people do stuff without reward? And it doesn't actually fit with the Christian faith, because there's a lot of times we do stuff for other reasons than just the reward. So it doesn't necessarily explain everything, but there's reasons for it. It is deterministic. So there's no hope. You have to change the environment if you want change, but there's nothing you could have done different with your life, because your environment is dictating what you're doing. You're doing this because of this. Everything has a tick for tack in this. You do this because of this. You do this because there's nothing extra about a human. There's nothing beautiful about a human. You are just an animal getting a reward or punishment, walking through your maze of life. Okay, that's it. So it has a bleak outlook in general. And you don't care about motives. You don't care about, what somebody was thinking or how they felt. All you care about is the behavior, and you want to change it. And how are we going to get this behavior changed? You don't care about dreams. You don't care about, anything deep in a person. You just care about a behavior. Okay? So while this was going one way in psychology, right at the very same time, you had Freud going his own way. Everybody else in physiology, in psychology, in almost every science, they are researching out of a laboratory.
This is Sigmund Freud.
Freud did not. He was the only one that did not.
So,
Sigmund Freud, yes. So Freud was different than all the other researchers at the time. All the other ones were in a laboratory. Freud was in his office with his couch. Okay? He did not study rats or dogs. He only talked with people. Freud brought something to psychology at the time that nobody had been dealing with, and still actually brings value today. So I'll skip a lot of Freud because he's just a weird guy. And that's the fun part about psychology, is every theory that was brought to the table is a person. Every theory, if you read about the person, that's what they wrote. They wrote their life on a piece of paper and called it a theory. Just an example, Bowen is a guy who developed a family systems theory. So it's a theory, and it's working with families, and it's a great theory. His view of health was to go home to a family reunion and to enjoy his time with his family without being caught up in the drama of his family. So all the things that you could use to define health, he believed health was go home to a reunion and don't get caught up in the drama. Well, that's great, but the reason he thought that was health was because he couldn't go home to his family without getting caught up in the drama. He had that experience, so he knew he was healthy when he could finally go home without drama. And so it's just silly. That's like the best example, because come on now, that's how, but that's how he viewed life. All of these theorists in psychology, you read it and they are telling you their life and how they found to explain their life. And they call it a theory. So Freud is no different. He had a very weird child upbringing. His mom bathed him still when he was 11. It didn't seem like there was anything sexual, but it was very sexualized. She probably was using him in replacement for her husband. And he just had significant weird situations in his childhood, and then was a weird dad with his daughter. He just had issues. And so how he explained the world was because he was trying to explain his life. And so there are some useful tools that come from it, but as a whole, you would think it's very strange. So we'll skip a lot of it. One of the biggest things with Freud is he thought everything was about sex. And people that followed him, studied under him, and said, okay, we like it all, but there's more things than just sex. But that was Freud. What he did bring of value was this idea of the unconscious. And this would be what's deep down inside us that we don't even know about, but it actually is impacting our life all the time. So I'm actually going to draw, I think, just to make it a little different.
Well, this is true, but the unconscious part?
Well, the unconscious, you can see a part of it being true. You'll recognize it as being true as I talk about it. But as a whole, Freud's just a guy trying to explain them. But this aspect does make sense to me. It actually fits in a Christian worldview, and you'll see why in just a moment. So Freud would say that inside the unconscious, what we are not aware of, he would put a variety of things. So he would put Past experiences. Okay, it might be past experiences from your childhood. It might be dreams that you have or fantasies. Might be your sex drive. Might be your fears, your anxieties, and what's called the id. Okay, so he broke a person up into 3 sections: the id, the ego, and the superego. Now, none of this is true, but there's an aspect of it that will come out as making sense. So the id is seen as like the 2-year-old. It's the part inside you that wants whatever it wants, when it wants, immediate gratification, wants pleasure, avoids pain, it's impatient, it wants, if your id was in charge, you'd get anything you wanted immediately. Okay? And so there's a part in every person, supposedly, you know, that has this side that, you know, you just give it to your id or your 2-year-old, and then you just bought something on an impulse and, you know, spent a fortune and whoops, you know, was that a good decision? I don't know. But the id is that 2-year-old that just throws temper tantrums and just wants what it wants. And then you have what's called the ego and the superego. This is a part of you. The ego is the part of you that controls the id. The ego and the superego control the id. So there's a part of you. Now watch in a biblical worldview why I think this actually makes sense. A part of you wants what it wants now. It wants, maybe a part of you wants to have sex with a bunch of people. Funny audience to say that with, but it's okay. You know, maybe a part of you wants to just spend $100,000 today for something fantastic, and you don't care about the consequence. Okay? Your id wants to do a lot of stuff that would get you in trouble. Your ego and your superego keep the id in control. The ego is like a cop saying, whoa, calm down, you'll go to jail. Stop it. You don't need to be doing that right now. And the superego is like a pastor. Whoa, you don't need to do that. That's not moral. That goes against your belief system. So these ego and superego, according to Freud, are the part of you that will stop the id from doing what it wants based off either logic or morality. So this is his way to organize what he's seeing. But if you think of the sin nature battling against the spirit, you can see that there's a piece of you that always wants to do things it's not supposed to do. And then another side of you that's trying to stop that for a variety of reasons. It goes against your faith, it's sin, or, you know, it's not good for you right now, it doesn't fit, you know, your family, whatever the reasons may be. But there is a battle in believers of the sin nature against the spirit and being led by the spirit that's seen. I don't think that's what Freud was seeing because I don't think he was a believer. But it's interesting how they do relate. So still different, but the aspect that I do like is that there's probably stuff inside us that we are not aware of that are controlling our behaviors every day. It could be a habit. It could be a past memory that's still impacting our life every day, but we don't think about the memory. We might not remember it at all, but it changes our life, and we act different because of it. It could be fears that we have. It could be anxiety. It could be fantasies. It could be things inside us we don't think about, but they're there, and they are impacting what we do. Okay? So in that regard, I do think it's a valid concept worth thinking about. And so the whole point of what Freud was doing was to get what's unconscious, what we're not aware of, to the conscious. He said there's only a teeny tiny bit that we know about, the rest is in our unconscious. And if we could be aware of it, it wouldn't control us. If we could be aware of it, then we wouldn't be impacted by it. Now, I do think there's some truth to that, but there's some people that would have insight and become aware of something, and their life still doesn't change. And some people become aware of something, and it changes their life. So I don't think it would help everybody, but the concept, I think, was a valuable concept brought to psychology that nobody else thought of. Because remember, nobody else cared. Everybody else didn't give any value to thoughts or dreams or emotions or anything like that. They only saw behaviors. And Freud thought it's all about childhood. When people ask the question, why do people do what they do? Because of your mom. That was the answer. Because he thought the first 6 years of the life were most important. And whatever happened there would dictate the rest of your life. And so in that case, he was also deterministic. You don't have control over your life now. The reason why your life is the way it is because of your childhood. And there's nothing you could have done to change it. So he also was deterministic and very different than behaviorism, but had that same pattern of belief. There's nothing you could have done to change it. No optimism, very bleak view of people again, to say, what are you going to do? It's your mom's fault. Okay? What do you think about Freud?
But there is a picture that came to my mind is that when if a child that he should go, that would be far from him, as he grew up, right? So to
Yes.
a certain extent,
Yes.
We cannot just take it as it is,
Sure.
but there is a next that comes also, right? You bring up the moral framework to a child,
Mm-hmm.
a certain extent that lasts. The prodigal came back home because in the memories that he has.
When you were saying that, one verse that kind of came to mind is the Holy Spirit digs deep within you of that hidden dark sin.
Mm-hmm.
It reveals stuff.
Yes. So the concept that came out of Freud called psychoanalysis, the theory, it would say if you squish something down, it comes out everywhere. If you push something and try not to think about it or not to address it or not to look at it, pretend like it's not there, what's called repress, it's coming out everywhere else in your life, but you don't connect it. It's very powerful. I think it's true. If you read Defense Mechanism, I was going to get a printout, so I'll email it to you. I forgot to print it out. But an example is projection. So I have an anger problem, and I'm so mad at you because you have an anger problem. You need to stop it. I'm so angry. I'm so frustrated that you're so angry. It's like, what are you talking about? So you take your problem and you see it everywhere else. And the idea is you have a problem you're not willing to look at, so it's coming out everywhere else. And everybody else has an anger problem when it really you do. It's just one example of how you would have insight into what's down inside you that you're not recognizing. And all Freud did was have a person sit on a couch and try to get to this unconscious. He used dreams, he used hypnotism, he used all kinds of stuff. But the problem was with Freud is the person he'd have all these things he'd tell him, oh, now I see. You are angry at your mom because of this. And he'd give them all this interpretation. And they'd, oh, wow, that's amazing. It's all connected now. Goodbye. And they'll go on for years and years and years. So people actually didn't get help. They thrashed around all these concepts of why they were how they were from their childhood, but it actually never produced a healthy person, not easily at least. It could happen, but no insurance company pays for it. Like you're crazy. No. So it would take years and years of looking inside and thinking of memories. And so it wasn't realistic within, society.
That is a problem nowadays, right? Because you talk to any average person, so all of a sudden it's often families, some excuse of because somebody did something, that is why they became.
Well,
right?
So they'll use this concept, but they're not going to use psychoanalysis like Freud did. Nobody uses that hardly at all anymore because it just takes too long and doesn't actually, if it worked, there's no way to show it worked, hardly at all. So nowadays it's evidence-based. I want to see it, I want to measure it, we're back to empiricism. If you can't prove through science that it's effective, you shouldn't be using it. I think that's a negative to psychology. I think people should be inventive and try new things. But right now, the fad is prove it in science or don't use it. Okay? All right. So Freud was the same time frame as behaviorism, both are deterministic, but one's looking at animals and behaviors, and one's with people and they're unconscious. So very different worlds, but all of them deterministic. And then we come to humanism. Very, very different. Obviously, it comes out of a philosophy, of humanistic philosophy, when humanism was popular in general. And you can see as we go through, really at the core, these people are explaining behaviors in life without God. And humanism, much more even. Humanism would say that humans are the highest of beings and that humans have ultimate potential. The top would be self-actualized, okay? And they are innately good and they have everything they need to flourish and be the best human possible. All they need is a certain type of environment. So if you were going to be using humanism, humanistic psychology, all you would do is create a warm, caring environment for the person. That's it. They will fix themselves. They will look within themselves and fix themselves. Because humans, what was that? Because the high speed, yes. And so all that's happened is environment along the way has gotten in the way, messed them up. For example, maybe they have an anger problem. Well, they're not allowed to have an anger problem in their family, so they pretended like it doesn't exist. And they've separated their anger from them, and they hide it in a corner. Maybe they have an addiction to pornography, and that's bad. That's not something that they're allowed to have with their faith, so they're going to take their addiction to pornography and separate it out and put it over here and hide it, so that they can be the person that they feel okay about looking in the mirror. Well, humanism will say, it's all who you are anyway. Just take your good and your bad and ugly and give it a hug. Accept who you are. And as a counselor, you wouldn't judge. You would just accept that person 100%. Whatever, good, bad, ugly, anything they say, 100% you accept them. And if you do, you can create this warm, fuzzy environment for them to look within themselves and fix themselves. What do you think about that?
Except sometimes you can approve it.
I've had many people say, if I could have found it inside myself, we would not be here. Okay, so the benefit it brought was it brought value to being human back. Because before that, it was very much, you're an animal. Evolution brought in a different view of humans, so there was no value in humans. And we'll look at it if we have time. If you guys survive, don't kill over on me. The social side of it, when you had John F. Kennedy, I get those two confused, I gotta stop that. FDR, with his New Deal, and bringing in social welfare services and everything. When you had that, you had psych wards before and after, okay? So before all that, you had mental institutions where they were like psychiatric wards, huge hospitals. People could get locked away for less than you think. So you did have mentally ill, but you also had physically ill, physically disabled. But in the society, if a woman had PMS and her husband was mad at her, she could get locked in these psych wards. So it's pretty extreme. So when that was happening, you didn't put the same value on that person as you would on another person. They're not able to get back to society, and that fits within evolution. So they lock them away. So one benefit with humanism is treating humans, all humans well, came in to be in effect. So it's one benefit, that it did bring the value back to being human just because you're human, because you're the most amazing being. Also, though, what's interesting is the application of humanistic psychology is actually wonderful for Christians. But first, look how terrible it sounds. You had a pastor with a biblical worldview hearing somebody teach on this, you would not stay. People are innately good. It goes against the sin nature that we know as they are all humans. And I always say, if you had a 2-year-old, you would know this is not true. And it is defining life without God. Humans are the highest. There's so much against Scripture, it's ridiculous. But watch the flip side of it. If you look at humanism and you think of a believer who has the Holy Spirit inside, every human does have ultimate potential, but not because they're human, but because of God inside them, the Holy Spirit inside them, the access to the power of the Holy Spirit. There's ultimate potential in humans, and to do amazing things. There's a lot that actually would match up if you had God as the highest being. They tried to define it what they were seeing. I mean, if you look at humans and the complexity and the brain, they're amazing. It makes sense that you would come to the conclusion that they're amazing, but they kept trying to do it without God. Also, if you think of accepting somebody for who they are, the good, bad, and the ugly, as Christians sometimes we might cringe because we would think, no, I'm not going to tell him his porn is okay. And that is true. The only thing is, at the moment when somebody is trying to get help, probably the worst thing you can do is say, ew, gross, what's your problem? That's sin. You know, that there is an aspect to the initial meeting that you take somebody right where they're at and you don't judge them. You listen to their problem and you build a connection before you move farther. So I use humanistic psychology for the very beginning to connect with a person. And the keys that it brings are, and you'll get more of this later, so you don't have to remember it now, but to be able to listen without judging. Just listen to everything they're saying, and how you respond back to them, they know you're listening. You're getting it. And that you don't judge them, and that you're very sincere with them. Those are kind of the concepts. It sounds simple, but if somebody was in a crisis, or that somebody just died, or if they're the first person they told something to, those types of things, sure, I would actually listen to them, show that I care. I wouldn't judge them at the beginning. The thing is, I wouldn't leave them there. I would start there to build a connection, but I'm not going to leave them there. I'm going to at some point bring in, if something's unhealthy or something's a sin or something, I will bring in truth eventually. So even though it started as something that's very against Christianity, I'll find value and I stick it in my pocket. I ignore the rest and I use what I think works well. And I think there's some strategies given from them that works. But the aspect is, of course, Christians think it's evil. It makes sense because at the core it really was. But I'm not going to miss opportunity to take something that could be valuable from it just because of where I found it. Okay? All right. Applied psychology. I'm not going to say too much about this, only that there was this trend that people didn't want to hear about psychology anymore unless psychology gave them something that was helpful. And that's actually why I use the word applied biblical psychology. I think it actually mimics, I don't want to undermine what I'm doing, but I think it mimics a little bit to say, okay, great, you're going to teach me something. What's it going to produce? What value is going to come from it? And that's what kind of happened in the time frame, that people didn't want to hear about it unless it was going to actually produce something good for them. And they wanted the applied side. So one way was intelligence testing, which is actually terrible, but that's okay. Because remember, intelligence was your senses, how well you hear, how well you see. So they first studied people to see how intelligent they were based off how they're measured with senses. Then they used the intelligence test to put people in categories in the military and assign them to different posts. And they still do that today. So you take an intelligence test and you can be over here doing this in the military, and you can be over here doing this based off your intelligence. Well, of course, we know more about intelligence now, was not accurate, and we're still using intelligence tests to discriminate. That's still a problem. Even though there's been advances to help that, we still, if somebody's from another culture, might be completely different, but it will give them a lower IQ test based off lack of understanding the questions and the content from the question. So unfortunately, it ended that. But at the time, they thought, oh, thank you, psychologists. We'll give these tests, and now in jobs We know who to give raises to, who to promote, because they're going to make good managers because they scored high on an intelligence test. Industrial organizational psychology had to do with teaching people business strategies. So they'd study to see how could you have an employee be happy at their job? How could you create an environment where they'll work harder and produce more? And they study and had results, and they could teach businesses. Here, implement these and you're going to get more out of your employees. And where the wars, that was really important, right? Because we need an assembly line that's going to produce more quickly. Advertising, still used very much today. You know, at the time, they needed to talk the United States people into being pro-war. They used advertising to get the people to be pro-war. That's where it started, and then obviously went far from there. Forensic psychology would have to do with any kind of court system. And so what they found is that eyewitnesses are terrible. And so they were taking eyewitnesses. Well, I saw them do it. All right, murder. And they realized that different people saw different color shirts, saw different everything. They remember the whole event completely different. So they realized through studying that eyewitnesses were terrible and they didn't use them the same way in court systems anymore. Okay? And then clinical psychology. And I'll just kind of jump through a little bit because I can feel in the air that you guys are gonna.
I was just thinking, I told Raymond he should go for organizational psychology.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Because we have a small company, but you know, we gotta have a psychologist.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's the thing. There's a video on TED Talks where a guy's presenting findings. It's findings that we've known for a long time. They're duplicatable. You can always find the results accurate. And businesses won't use the information. Google does. Google has 10% or 20% of their time that people could do whatever they want to use creativity. They have things worked into their system. But there's key things that businesses could do that would change the whole environment and people would love their job and work better. And businesses do not use it. Very interesting.
Why not?
I think it goes against what they would think is logical.
You think they're goofy off?
Yeah, because one of the things is, for example, one specific strategy, in an 8-hour day, if you told a person you have to work these specific set hours, but these other hours, you can do whatever you want to. You can come in early, you can come late. You can pick the hours that you eat. So 6 hours, you have to be here. 2 hours, you can decide what you're going to do that day. Early, late, doesn't matter when you come in. That flexibility increases their satisfaction in the job and they actually work better. But for a business person to tell their employee they could do that, it seems so risky. Because what if they just goof around? What if they don't come in? What if, you know? So I believe that's why. But I have implemented it and I have had it work very well. So with the New Deal, the setup that worked against us was the social welfare system came in. And so what it did is where the church was normally responsible for taking care of the poor, the needy, mentally ill, and all of that, it was removed and put into a government agency type of social system. And that has existed since then in the United States. And I do think that it is a time right now because of how difficult it is to get services. Whatever the Affordable Care Act says, it's actually very difficult, very expensive. People are not getting help. If the church could provide these types of services, then we would have a different kind of relevance in our community. And we could take back what was always a part of the church, always a part of the church, and it was removed until now when we could take it back. Also, something very specific that happened, there was a time frame when pictures inside the insane asylums and the mental health hospitals came out to the public, and the pictures looked very similar to Jews after Hitler. We had won the war. It was a few years later, and then pictures inside our hospitals, our state hospitals, matched what they looked like. They were overcrowded, they were in feces, they were skinny because they weren't fed, they were being abused. And for the American public, it was a realization that we could do what we thought only Germany could do. And it was awful. And so they wanted these hospitals to be closed down. So as actually Eleanor, is that Roosevelt's wife? Eleanor. She was actually very involved, but he supported moving from state hospitals to community-based programs for mentally ill. So it was all set up, and then he died. So the states were supposed to take responsibility to create these community-based programs, and they didn't. So but they closed the hospitals down. So a lot of the mentally ill actually went on the streets. And, you know, it's different population nowadays, but for a time, a lot of the people that were homeless in the United States, that's one of the reasons they were homeless, is because they were kicked out of the hospitals with no place to go. So it was an unfortunate ending to something that started out with a good motive. So anyway, we don't have the same state hospitals anymore, so that's a good thing, but we did have a homeless problem, and we still do for other reasons as well. But I do think that we have an opportunity to come in a powerful way and make a difference. And if we are comfortable using psychology and counseling, then we can make an impact, I think, in our community. So thinking through what that would look like will be kind of the process, and we'll look next week more. But that's what I'll leave you with, is just thinking, you know, how could we do this, and what would it look like? And I do see two aspects. The counseling side is kind of the social services side and helping people's needs in an application way. The psychology side is who's doing studies to find patterns that we can use, because we could have those with a biblical worldview researching also, and having right neck and neck with other people legitimate scientific evidence based off the same way everybody else is conducting research, but we're coming with that biblical worldview. I think that could also be a powerful way we could impact our community. So that shows you, hopefully you see why it is very logical that there is opposition of psychology on Christians, and yet how, if we took the history out of it and we just left it alone, we could come to this profession with a biblical worldview and handle it better. We could take advances. And throughout, I've used these examples, but remember, science said the earth was flat. Science said that that our senses are how we explain the world, and we know now through science that our senses can be altered by others easily. They're not reliable. There's a lot of times, and then we've seen all of these people that have developed theories in counseling, they have explained life based off their view and their experiences. And there's value to some of them, but they're just another person. So if we just take them as another person, and we come and we study and we come with tools, that we're going to have a better opportunity because we're starting with truth.
But the understanding of the history is needed also for these things come. Each of the school of thoughts came.
Yes.
So we should know what it is and where it comes from.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because I really do believe that each try to explain the world and they only get a piece. So you have to stick them all together and you're still not there. You know, that behaviorism is true. I can see it be true a lot. Well, then later you have cognitive behavior where our thoughts are important. Yes, I believe in that. And then you have, maybe it's our unconscious. Yep, that's true too. So, they are against each other. Like if you're a behaviorist, you think Freud's crazy. Everybody's against each other. No, you're wrong. I have the right theory. No, they're all filled with aspects of ridiculousness and truth. But you have to try so hard to gather them all together to figure out something that works, or start with the Bible. If you start with the Bible, it all unfolds. And that's what I've been working on. It'll take me a little bit. in my head, but I would like to write a theory of counseling that is only from scripture. So one day I'll get there. And it's just amazing how many answers the Bible gives.
Do you want the camera on when you do that? I don't know, okay, I was watching The Wire, I didn't know if you were filming this for something else.
Oh, which wire? What are you talking about?
That one wire, well, now that you're done, when you were holding it, it was showing up on there.
Oh, I think I turned it off. It's okay.
Are you streaming it?
I just recording it, not streaming it, because nobody was streaming in.